Welcome to Multifamily Method, a podcast which explores the state of the multifamily real estate market and some of the backgrounds, methodologies, and words of wisdom from some of today's most successful multifamily real estate entrepreneurs nationwide. Today's episode of Multifamily Method features Marc Hershberg, Managing Partner and CEO of Topaz Capital Group. Topaz Group is a leading private debt and equity real estate investment firm focusing on multifamily and residential property acquisition and development primarily across the Southeast. Before founding Topaz Group, Marc Hershberg had successful stops at both UBS Financial and Brick Capital, specializing in client management, loan financing, and debt acquisition. Thank you for listening to Multifamily Method. Here's your host, Jad Risha.
Well, today we have Marc Hershberg, the CEO of Topaz Group, in studio with us. What's going on, Marc? How are you today?
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Down in sunny Miami?
Oh yeah. As I was saying, as we briefly touched upon the other day, earlier, is I'm still, straggling to understand how I, put on sweatpants again down here and, start wearing more formal clothing. So I'm in that whole casual phase all over again down here and trying to figure out the balance between casual life and professional.
It's a little more casual than New York. You can sort of, dress more comfortably. Florida's nice that way.
Oh yeah. It's really, it has that beauty to it. I think sometimes, we just have to remember to take ourselves seriously, even if we're looking down at our shorts and our sneakers.
Yeah, that's right.
While touring properties. But at the same time, if you're a Florida-based company and your assets are Florida, it's kind of hard for me to understand how people, run around in their, running around in anything less than loose and comfortable outfits.
Yeah, that's right, man. That's right. So how much time are you spending down here versus back in New York?
So I would say, I'm kind of back and forth. We kept the New York office open to be able to accommodate not only some of our key employees, but also to make sure that we keep presence there for our family offices and ultra high net worth investors that are mostly coming out of the region. So the New York tri-state region, I would call it. So that's part A. And then, I would say spending in terms of time wise, somewhere between once every 6 weeks or so, back up in New York and visiting some family in New Jersey, which is always nice. Getting on the other side of the island, and just being the stomping ground where we grew up. Jersey was for my wife and I, and now our newborn, our baby was born there, and we spent our lives there. So part of us always feels a certain connection to Jersey and New York.
Yeah.
And that's always been inside of me. I feel like I got that Jersey boy deeply rooted inside of me somewhere. So there's always that inner struggle between.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, a lot of people have done what you've done, which is in the last 2 years, which is start spending more time in Florida, which is probably why you guys are buying apartments down here actively, right? Because of the demographic shifts down here. So I guess welcome to being a Floridian.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, to your point, I subscribe to my own thesis.
Right.
I was telling everyone, the migration numbers of 2,000 something people a day, or 1,800 a day at one point. I think it topped out at like 2,600 something, people a day, and in migration, and that was, really wild. I mean, that was beyond, those were epic proportions compared to even pre-COVID, where you were seeing 200-300 people a day moving in.
Right.
So that, you're talking about 10x multiple, anywhere between a 5 to 10x multiple on what they historically saw in immigration. So.
Right. So today is the 13th. We're a couple of weeks out from NMHC. Typically, we're all very busy, but there is no deal flow in the market right now. And just curious kind of what you're working on, what you're seeing, what's your worldview, and how are you spending your days?
Oh yeah, you nailed it. It's to your point, deal flow slowed down. So we're kind of just taking a step back and we're saying, okay, how do we focus on housekeeping? So that's been a big, big conversation, topic of conversation internally and externally at our company. Where are we going for 2023? What does that look like based on a lot of wild card variables, which we can't necessarily understand right now? But a lot of that is us taking a pause, right? Not pause, but rather focusing on, our in-house, making sure that it's stronger, more resilient. We'll get into later, I'm sure, this is an era of operational excellence, and being extra cautious in terms of underwriting and due diligence and things of that nature.
Right.
So those types of things are really, I would say, big attributors. So right now we're housekeeping, I would say, focusing on establishing, NMHC's around the corner, as you know. So it's
Right.
juggling that calendar, thanks to Tatiana. Shout out to Tatiana. She really runs my schedule for me, myself, my partner, Eitan. She runs our schedules, make sure that we're, in front of all the key players in the markets, from brokers, servicers to, to other, owners and developers. So
Right.
that's the type of thing we're doing now is really just, we're rebranding as well. We're not rebranding per se, but we're setting out a new, more corporate type of branding appearance now in 23. So we're going towards more of, hey, we're a multifamily shop. Let's present that to the world. So, garden style being our focus. So hence, the background here,
Yeah.
virtual background, that's really our focus this year, is to kind of, hone in on our expertise and stick to our guns. And that's what we're working on right now, is basically defining where's the line in the sand, essentially, for this coming year.
Right. And there's going to be a lot of, I have a client that I talk to pretty regularly, and she said, a lot of owners now in the last 5 years really haven't had to focus on asset management because it's all kind of run itself. And now it's going to be critical to operate these properties, optimally to get through whatever rocky times may be coming up. A lot of people's cash flow has been reduced by floating rate debt. And then, rents are starting to flatten at minimum, I'd say. Depending on where you're at. I think most of Florida is okay, but there are pockets where it's starting to get a little softening. So I think it's going to be, asset management is going to be critical over the next, 12 to 24 months.
Great segue for kind of how we're looking at the market. We just hired a VP at SPM. She's actually unofficially, so news is coming out here on your podcast.
Okay.
She's starting Monday. We picked her up. She's just promoted to a VP. She's fantastic. She been 31, 32 years in the business, knows the ins and outs of it. Obviously incredibly talented and just a great person to have on the team going into such a, like you said, rocky operational period. We're, historically, it's funny in our business, is that, up until, call it 9 months ago, plus or minus, we were basically, you could sell the next guy on your value add and you don't have to execute your plan. You really don't have to do much. Operationally, wasn't rocket science. Granted, you have to make right decisions and choose your tenants, have good qualification processes, but it really wasn't an era of focusing on operations. It was an era of, leveraging basically 0% financing, going in to, buy deals pretty much in markets where rents were growing at 10 up to, Lakeland and Tampa of the world's 26, 7, 8, 9.
Yep.
30% year over year increases. So, those were really, how should I say, even your mistakes get covered up and are almost unknown and don't even present themselves because everything else is playing towards your benefit. So I think now that's getting, the tectonic plates under us are kind of shifting, and we're saying to ourselves, well, one foot's kind of, moving back in terms of acquisitions, the other foot's moving forward in terms of, hey, the environment is playing against us. how do I keep a balance? And that's the type of thing I think is going to differentiate, the adults from the boys in this era. And I think that's where a lot of, at least from what I'm talking to, a lot of, multi-generational or, syndicators or developers been through multiple cycles said, this is the era in which, our expertise comes into play. Acquisitions, great, but that's not really what we need to be focusing on coming into this new era.
Right. And this is a area where the experience can help differentiate operators, right?
Absolutely. Experience as well as, being collaborative, communicate, transparency and communication, because any blip in the road now is a blow versus yesterday it was still the blip. So it was like,
right.
Today it's like for every mistake you make has a more drastic impact.
So you just bought a deal in Lakeland, right?
Yes.
And that I think is probably what would you call that the highest quality asset you've acquired to date?
Absolutely.
Okay. So curious. I mean, I don't know if you've, as you just bought that deal, I think a couple months ago, right? Sure. Well, I'll be curious to get your feedback going forward on, how it differs to operate an asset like that versus, the 70s kind of workforce housing that you've previously owned and operated. And I guess, maybe that's a good question is, what challenges are being posed in operating that product type right now?
It's a great question. We're finding that, Class A and Class B product, or call it your older vintage product, opportunistic value add, if you will, to your more Class A core properties are two different worlds. One is more about marketing and staying full on the Class A side is what we're learning. So it's about, about keeping it super clean, breezeways being dirty is unacceptable. Pool being closed for a day or two, unacceptable, as were Class B properties, maybe less painful and less, you'd get less, I guess, call it entitled tenants, slightly, because they're expected the less. I wouldn't say unentitled tenants, because tenants have the right to be entitled at all properties. But there's definitely an element of how do we make sure that you're just marketing the property well, keeping it occupied, and keeping the tenant and high tenant retention rates. So that's really the name of the game on the Class A front. Obviously, buying, the buying basis being critical. But at the end of the day, it's more driven by, Class B is more driven by what you could operationally execute in terms of CapEx. And, if you have, for example, another example being, 70s, 80s, or 90s deal like we do throughout Florida, those deals are, inherently less sensitive to certain changes. Where Class A is. So if you make a certain, change in a Class A property, at the end of the day, they're renters more by luxury than they are by necessity. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind. And that's something we tend to forget as landlords, or as individuals. We forget that, there are some people that still have, even though they're renting, they're not owning a home or owning a condo, they still have the ability to go elsewhere. And they deserve that ability to have a higher quality of life at the property. So that's the balance, I would say, between Class B and Class A.
So is this acquisition sort of an indicator of where you're going to focus going forward, or was it more just driven by, the capital partnership behind it?
Great question. I would say both. So the decision was brought in through the capital partnership, but primarily because myself and my partner Eitan, who gets a lot of the credit for our early successes and the company being built alongside myself, we both basically went back and forth. They said, we're going to a time where operations is critical. We're going to a time where capital markets is shifting faster, is moving quicker than the deals are themselves to closing. Even on the due diligence period alone, capital markets was shifting faster by the time you complete your due diligence. So, that type of thing was, we start saying, okay, how do we mitigate those risks? And one of the ways of doing that, while also finding a motivated seller, is typically with new product. Because a new product seller a developer says, hey, I'm household. I get to get in, get out. I know what I'm doing. I built. For
Right.
us, it's acquisitions, dispositions. We're finance guys, we're real estate guys, but we're not necessarily builders. We understand, we studied it in school, business school, and what have you, but that's not our forte. So, at the end of the day, we're definitely looking towards, continuing to do, really continuing to do more of the new product where, they're in lease up and we do forward-looking agreements. We also like that because, they have to be realistic with where the market is, because if we look at their lease up schedule and we say, okay, well, rents are now starting to soften or decline, it's no longer the conversation of yesterday's seller where, hey, I'm selling you all my upside. No, it's not. The loss to lease is burned out because that's the new state of the market. So it's
not summer 21 anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we love that, it's no longer summer 21. We love that, the guys are get out. That's their business plan. And we're there to do programmatic deals. So it's more of an alignment with our strategy. And as it is right now in Florida, and we can get into this, I'm sure this could be a whole nother podcast on its own, is insurance. Insurance is wild. I mean, especially as a Florida centric multifamily firm like ourselves, we're kind of saying to ourselves, well, what does it have to do with us, for older product? That's going to be dangerous. And, where taxes going to reassess an older product. It's going to be much more difficult to essentially have fixed expenses and assumptions that you could really put a pulse on value add deals. Now, granted, if there's pain, we'll step in and we can sensitize to those rents and the softening of rents, and and we have enough capex to, even if capex continues to increase, supply chain shortage, all the kind of headwinds that come across and challenges that come across with running a value add deal. You take out that risk, and nowadays, I could be mistaken, but I'm still seeing only like a 2-3% delta in IRR from your turnkey asset to your value add deal. So, if that's, you're not really being rewarded for taking on so much risk and doing so much work.
Well, it's tough to even gauge what the market for any of these deals really is right now, because there's not a whole lot out there, and there's even less that's actually transacting, right? So it's all sort of in theory, and what's being, I guess price discovery is like the new term out there, right? But it's basically like, I mean, a lot of the deals that we did see in the market towards the end of the year last year was really more a fishing expedition than anything else. And so, it's tough to, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday, and they're a developer, and he said, we're getting close to stabilization. We're less inclined to take a discount. I said, what do you define as a discount? Because what do you define as market today? Right. I mean, there's not a lot transacting right now to be able to like clearly define market. And I think we still are going to be in that limbo period for a little while until the capital markets stabilize, hopefully later this year.
Yeah. And yeah, to your point, I mean, it's capital markets driven, very heavily capital markets driven. A lot of it, like to your point, we went in a few deals, not the same names, but we went to a few deals where sellers were really, doing price discovery. They pulled back. We got close to $102 million deal. We were at 102. They were asking 105. We were at 102.5. Seller was like, hey, we're right here. We're inching closer. And, they said, you know what? It's actually cash flow we can't replace. We're going to pull back.
Right.
Thank you very much. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, so it was more of like, what's our value of our asset? Shockingly, they ran it through a full marketing process. So I felt more, and that's part of being a good, we'll get into this later, but putting yourself in the shoes of the brokers and putting yourself in the shoes of the servicers allows you to be a better partner and relationship to them. So that's what, I tried doing this past year, is that, look at these deals, try to focus on making sure that if they have to move quickly, we move quickly. If they have to go through a full marketing process, we go through it with them, because that was a challenging year. So I would say a challenging second half of the year for most of the real estate industry.
Right. All right. Well, we talked a little bit about sort of what you just bought, what you own. Why don't we spin it back a little bit and give everybody a little bit of a background on, how Topaz started and how you got into this business?
Sure. So Topaz was essentially founded by myself, my partner, Eitan Freeman. It was originally just a fractional GP vehicle. So a bunch of, fractured GP interests that I managed to, have the fortune of buying, right after coming out of corporate banking at UBS. I went over to Brick Capital Group run by Joel Radman and Eric Roth, and George Niblock to a large extent. So those guys, had multiple companies within real estate, everything from sales to lending to, their own in-house property management to rental company and what have you. So I got to see a holistic lens of the business. And so that really allowed me to get a taste of ownership at some point when, they started saying, well, we don't mind you doing deals as long as, you're still working for us and still, essentially promoting our own platform. So that's essentially what happened. It was Topaz was essentially founded out of an itch for something that I didn't even realize was so great. And that, the second I started itching the ownership side and started buying and syndicating with a couple, one of the partners, Joel Radman, who took a leap of faith with me. We started buying Philadelphia assets primarily. And those fractional, let's call it anywhere from 5 to 25%, GP interest in these deals were just getting put into a bucket called Topaz Capital Group. I didn't even know what to call it, quite frankly.
Right. So where'd you come up with Topaz then? How did that even come about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So at the time I was like, I don't even know what to name this. I don't even you need an LLC. You have to drop in an LLC. My attorneys and accountants were telling me that, and that's everything I learned in school. So, that's what I did. And Topaz came about when, I thought about who really gave me the, who really gave me the ability to get, who really raised me at the end of the day, and who really had the biggest influences on me. And looking back in hindsight and at the time, it was very clear that it was my grandfather. And my grandfather was a founder of the Topaz industry, if you will, to a large extent, about 45 years ago. He, came into the market and discovered, which is actually very much what we do at Topaz, which is why I thought it was very apropos, is that the qualities, the fundamentals of the gem are semi-precious in nature. And the look and the appearance of it was a cloudy white stone. It didn't have much of of an appeal. So, that lack of appeal coupled with the fact that there is the potential to pull out that beauty is what he went for. And by nuclear radiating it with scientists for a few years, out of the country, he managed to pull out together this kind of beautiful blue gem, coloring. And that basically was the start of his more successful career after failing many times prior to.
Interesting. Very cool.
That's where it all comes from. And his company wasn't called Topaz, but it's the fact that he found that stone. And we're trying to do the same thing. If you remember, when we first started talking back in, call it 2018 or so, we were value add guys at our core.
Right.
So we were always kind of like, whether you want to call it lipstick on a pig, but we were always kind of enhancing the look of our properties.
Right.
And yet the locations were good. The fundamentals were good. The qualities were good, but it needed that appeal and needed that aesthetic appearance and someone to kind of see the vision for it. So that's really, I think, where a lot of it came from. Got it.
And so then, you got started with these guys, and then, how's it kind of, what steps have you taken to kind of grow it to where you've taken it to today?
Great question. So at one point, we were talking in the office and they're saying, hey, you can stay in the office and rent some desks. And, but I felt like at that point that would kind of never allow me to really take a leap of faith. If I kind of stayed in where I was and, to a large extent still doing, trying to juggle multiple balls at once, working for my primary employer, but also, focusing on building a platform and that's around the time where my partner came in the mix.
Got it.
My partner Eitan was working on his first deal in Chicago, just left Treetop Development, and the acquisitions team there. He understood equity really well. And his brother called me one day and he's like, listen, I know my brother Eitan, and I know you guys known each other and you share best friend, our best friends or brothers. And there's a lot of other connections, to each other. And basically, we basically said to ourselves, let's give it a shot. And so he, Eitan came to work next to me in the office at Brick Capital on 32nd Marc in Manhattan. And I was able to kind of, turn over, talk about our own deals going on while also turning back onto the phone and focusing on the computer and ramping up deals for Brick and then some side, had some pretty cool sales, being the Lower East Side, iconic sales being the Lower East Side Moxie Hotel, down in worked on some deals in Mott Haven, South Bronx when it was booming back in 2017, 18, when everyone's like the Bronx is going to be the new Manhattan.
Right.
You guys are nuts, but sure, go for it. Buy 4 or 5 caps there with rent stabilized, with limited upside and all the risk. So that was kind of what I was seeing. And that's also what drove us out. That's what drove me out. That was a time when back in 2017 and 18, when Steve Cronin went to jail, right? They put him in prison. They're like, you know what, landlords, we're making a statement. If you don't follow by the book, you don't follow. It was basically anti-landlord rhetoric on the regular, and legislators were starting to tweet that and started to come from themselves that they really believe in this narrative. Not only is it something they want to run on to get elected, but they really believed it themselves to a large extent, most of them.
Right.
And I would call them and be like, God, what's your campaign running on? And what's your take on that? Do you really believe in that? And right when I started seeing that pressure being that kind of like it's a pressure cooker of, anti-landlord rhetoric combined with,
cancel rent and all that.
Yeah. Cancel. Rent, that whole kind of, culture, it drove me to be like, to Joel Radman's point, my mentor, who is my former boss, now partner in some deals, he basically said to me, you can't control regulations. You can't control markets. You can control your business plan. That's it.
Right.
Control your business plan. You can't control the markets. And when he said that to me, it kept like, just resonated with me. And I was like, you know what, I got it. People called me crazy, but I'm like, I can't be buying in markets where, the legislators and the markets themselves don't want me to succeed.
Right.
So that was basically, I was like a year and a half before, about a year and a half before the rent laws, the rent regulation laws passed. So, people thought I was crazy saying, hey, this is, I don't know what's coming, but this is not going to be pretty, whatever's about to happen.
Right.
This will be getting worse before it gets better. So let me just skip town on it now. And that's when we started buying in like Chicago, Philly, and then we sold those like around 2019, and we went into Florida.
So what drew you to Jacksonville was your first deal, right?
Yes.
So then what drew you to Jax specifically, or was it just a deal?
So it was a deal combined with we knew Florida was going to be our, our call it stomping ground. We knew that was at least the hunting ground for deals. So for us, we said, okay, we know Florida is going to be the hunting ground for deals. And when we looked at Jacksonville, we saw a very undersupplied market, A. B, we saw a market that was, the deal first of all, the deal brought the attention to us. We met at the time, we met a partner, David Lynn, to his credit, took a big risk on us. On us being able to raise capital for a large deal that was, 4x or 5x the size of deals we did prior to. So we definitely did take a massive leap of faith. To give you an idea, our deal prior to buying Topaz Villas in Jacksonville was, or at the time was called, in Ortega Farms, basically. That deal was, it basically made us understand that, we're taking a massive leap of faith from the perspective of we're jumping from a $5 to $8 million deal to tying up a $35+ million deal. So, so that was a big jump. We were taking a big leap of faith, but we also felt like, you kind of just have to do it. You can't really, at some point you have to do it with a wherewithal, with understanding, hey, well, do we do well in the past? Can we show some track record? Yes. And also the environment at the time was still in an era where capital partners and equity were still looking to deploy. It's funny because the tables have turned, right? So they were, capital was pushing, we didn't have the track record or the reputation or the brand to say, hey, invest with us and come in with capital easy. But now we have that brand and reputation and track record, but we have lack of capital in the marketplace as a whole.
Right. Right.
That slowdown. So it's almost like a 360 over since we entered in Jacksonville in mid to early 2019.
Right.
So to answer your question, it was partly a function of having a partner willing to take a leap of faith with us. As young guys, I was 26 years old. My partner was 24 years old. We didn't really know, we were very nervous that, we were too young to fail. But we needed someone to take a leap of faith with us. And that was checkbox A. Checkbox B was that we're in the right hunting ground. We're in the right area that we said we were going to buy in. It's red, it's a red state, it's pro business, pro landlords, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Which we totally unfamiliar with coming out of New York.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was a big learning curve. And then also, garden style communities is what we really liked because we always said to ourselves, first of all, you're getting a large land mass, you're getting lower density, and you're getting, you're in an area where, it's truly it's the closest thing you're going to get to buying. It's the closest experience you're going to have as a tenant to having a home.
Right.
Without having a home that costs a lot of money, because to have a home with a pool and a gym and all the amenities would be very, very costly. So that was those were our main factors and why we said, we're going to do this. We're going to take that leap of faith, and until the minute of the closing, we were still raising. We were still closing the final gaps on dollars.
Hey.
And it was stressful. It's not something.
Absolutely.
We didn't tell, we weren't telling the broker this. We weren't telling anyone this. We were just.
Was it a fully marketed deal or was it off market?
It was an off market deal.
Okay.
It happened to be Berkadia, had the deal prior to, and the only way we felt it was fair is to still pay them. That's part of what I said earlier. Always treat the brokerage community well. Right. They're gonna have a long memory on that.
Right.
So, that ended up being one of our also very close relationships, Berkadia out of Florida. So, that really, was a very strategic move in the moment. Yes, you're, paying a 200,000, whatever type of commission you're paying. But at the end of the day, it worked out really well because, we were able to take the market, take the deal off market. We were able to step in right away. We were able to, basically go into this deal with a great value add executor. At least at the time, they were really pushing on value add as an operating company, JV company that we were with. And, basically we, just took that, we said, this is what it's going to be, and let's test it out in this deal. And if it works well, maybe it means us continuing to buy larger garden style deals across Florida. Right.
So it all sounds like smooth sailing at this point, but I'm sure it wasn't. So I guess what were some of the biggest challenges, obstacles, whatever you want to call it, in these early days and up to and after you bought Topaz Villas?
So, working back,
or maybe it was smooth sailing.
Yeah, no. There was a lot of turbulence along the way. There was definitely a lot of turbulence along the way. I would say it really was, if I had to summarize it in a nutshell, it was smooth sailing for the first part. But we were also figuring things out as we went, right? Because we still are. Like we always say to ourselves, we learn, we always quote, we quote, there's a lot of different quotes that are on the topic of, you always could learn from others, right? And you learn from those that are around you. So, basically that was our mentality, is how do we surround ourselves with people who know how to do it? How do we ask the right questions? And then and then we'll figure it out from there. So that was really our, our thought process. Now, going in mid 2019 allowed us enough time to kind of do all the exteriors of that project, do the heavy lifting on exteriors, and then focus on interiors. So, then we headed to 2020 into COVID. So that was a huge, headwind, and and an obstacle that candidly, we, not only us as young entrepreneurs and business owners, investment managers, or frankly, custodians of capital were nervous about, but we were also haven't been through this before. So
well, nobody really had it to
Right.
that degree, right? Yeah. I mean, it was all
Right.
uncharted territory.
Yeah, it was all uncharted territory in terms of pandemic, but it wasn't uncharted territory in terms of, hey, it's a turbulent environment. We're going
Yeah,
through,
fair.
and that's something we've never been through, and we never been through it on a large scale and a large project. So that was where, we were saying to ourselves, you know what, let's first see how things shake out. Let's slow down with acquisitions, but let's look at acquisitions carefully, because if we could still say to ourselves, the pandemic's basically, the way we looked at it, it was basically the thesis that played out. Everyone's going to want to go to more garden style properties. People are going to want to leave urban, go to suburban. People are going to want to be in the outskirts of the downtown CBDs, which is all the projects we essentially buy. We don't really buy urban core, mid-rise, high-rise product. So we kind of said that, I'm not saying it's a blessing in disguise that COVID occurred, but there were silver linings in COVID, in that we had our best operational months at our properties during COVID.
Right.
We had our best acquisitions. Topaz Gardens down the block from that property, was a 218 unit 70s deal that we bought, and that was a great deal. We bought it at like 80 a door range, and now we're getting POVs at, we're getting thrown offers left and right at, call it 140s, 150s a door. So, or even north of that, depending on, if they're real or not.
Right. Right.
But yeah, so that's the type of thing we're kind of seeing now. And, I in retrospect, it was a great time that made us focus on that, how to make ourselves stronger. And it forced my partner mostly focus on asset management and operations more so than I, so he could probably attest to this more than I can, but it made us really create a much closer relationship with our operating partner, much closer. So, talking to them more regularly, getting close with our managers and our staff at the properties rather, and really getting to know our tenants. Like, when did you ever really get to know your tenants at the level you did during COVID?
Right.
And ask them surveys and send it around, community events. And, it was actually a breath of fresh air in terms of community living and enhancing the community living. While people felt like it wasn't the case, it truly was, because it forced us to get to know tenants better, because lenders wanted to get to know our tenants better. And so it was, we're all essentially a borrower and a lender or partner. So we basically said to ourselves, we have to figure out, what is the resilience of our tenants, and we have to work with them. So, we were very fortunate to have that. I would say at the same time, that it gave a lot of, it presented a lot of opportunities for us. I would say the biggest headwinds were really, not knowing when our staff would get sick, like they'd be out with COVID, and, we don't have a leasing office running for 2 weeks. We shut down the leasing office because it was a mandate in the beginning for 3 months almost. Right. So, and Florida was one of the places they've opened the most.
Yeah. I was gonna say, imagine if you still had assets up north.
Right. Like, how do we even get in contact with, that leasing? How do we absorb some of that leasing traffic?
Right.
Or interact with our GCs and our, techs, maintenance techs, or whatever that might be at the property level. So that was really the challenge, was, figuring out how to get closer with one another, collaborate more with one another, and execute well with one another while having a distance barrier and constant inconsistency amongst working days. And it wasn't only tied to that individual. Like, we had a worker at the property, but the son got COVID and he was out for 2 weeks, so he had to stay home for 2 weeks.
You have to take him out of school and the whole deal. Yeah.
Out of school, and he can't work, and so we're sympathetic, and that's what made us very, our reputation as being employers and or partners of employers.
Well, it was just totally disruptive to the entire economy and the supply chain and the labor force and all of it. Right. I mean, and I think probably is, if you follow the breadcrumbs, is a part of the reason why we're in the situation that we're in today. Right. I mean, so, a massive amount of stimulus and a disrupted labor force and supply chain, basically.
Right.
So,
Right, and then you combine that with a crippling global economy with then thrown in a mix of a war amongst countries. I mean, the evolution of this was intense.
Yeah, the seeds that were those seeds were planted in February of 20, right? And the government response to COVID. Frankly,
right.
I mean, that's
it's almost
what it
like it's almost like they stripped the sun from the seeds, almost like all these things started becoming like a a shadow over the seeds of COVID, but then they ended up, it was when it rained it poured philosophy. So when COVID hit, then shortly after we learned that supply chain shortages were coming, then we learned that labor force was, issues were happening. And to your point, it was like as we thought, we'd come out of it, we were kept getting, buried further into a more difficult environment to run a company and run properties.
The Multifamily Method is powered by Capstone Companies, the largest privately owned multifamily investment sales brokerage nationwide. Capstone Companies provides dedicated coverage to both primary and secondary markets throughout the Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Midwest regions of the United States. Whether buying, selling, or refinancing, Capstone Companies is here to help. Simply put, Capstone is expertise, experience, extra mile. If you're interested in having Capstone provide a complimentary opinion of value on your multifamily asset, please visit us at capstone-companies.com.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's back to normal. I don't operate properties. Certainly down here it was not as disrupted as other places. But I don't think any of us had an idea of what that level of disruption was going to, the ripple effect it would create, basically 3 years down the road. Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, the one thing is that we really fervently believed in our thesis, right? So we believed that this migration would continue. We were also constantly talking to our mentors and our advisors and saying, guys, well, we're nervous. You've been through this before. Like, would you stay? A lot of them were saying, hold back, don't buy, because we don't know where the world's going. We agreed. We slowed down in terms of our acquisitions activity. But at the same time, I saw it as an opportunity because I truly believed that Florida was going to boom again, and boom at a level that hasn't boomed before, because whenever there's an event of isolation, there's a greater event of release. Always. Right. So the question is, could you figure out where that release occurs? And could you figure out, where they would probably, what outlets they would likely go to? And, being that quality of life was a key factor in COVID, and being outdoors, all of that.
That and the government response, those two factors. I mean, last year was the first year in forever that Florida was the highest percentage of in-migration in the country. Yeah.
And Florida is one of the few states, I don't know if you follow MHC, some MHC statistics, but, they're talking heavily about, Florida still, not all markets, but many of the markets still holding off, where there's a lot of, softening in rental rates. Florida is actually teetering down slightly or softening a little bit, but they're not necessarily going at the same pace as the rest of the country.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have not, like in Tampa, there's still rent growth. It's not flattened. It's not softened. It's still rent growth. Jacksonville is softening a little bit, I think. Orlando is too. There's a ton of supply in Osceola County that's been delivered and is coming. I think that has a lot to do with it. But South Florida, still rent growth. Gulf Coast, still rent growth. It's just some of the Central Florida pockets, and then North and Northeast are.
And it's interesting. Some people, and to your point, like, the Northeast is kind of its own animal, right?
Yeah.
And then the kind of the way I look at it is there's the Northeast, Then there's the Northwest, which is your Tallahassee to your Panhandle, or some people
Mhm.
call it anything west of of Tallahassee, is its own world.
Right.
And then, anything below, call it your Ocala down to your, call it Kissimmee, is your Central Florida.
Right.
Then kind of cutting around and then going down anything north, south of, call it the Space Coast, becomes your South Florida.
Right.
Or your very south of Vero Beach, rather, So, that type of thing, I think, is also critically important to understand, because if you can understand that dynamic of, them being heavily their own worlds and
Yeah.
own their own, almost their own like microeconomies, if you will.
Exactly.
Then you have to, look at it in that perspective as well.
Well, look, it's a big it's a big state, right? It's surrounded by water. So there's dynamics related to that. And there's a ton of industry down here. And there's tourism and healthcare are obviously, ubiquitous across pretty much all the markets in Florida. But there's finance and tech is starting to move into Tampa and the Gulf Coast in a pretty big way. If you look at, the Space Coast, obviously aeronautics and engineering, we all know what that's doing to drive the markets over like Melbourne, where you guys are at, and the Space Coast market. So you have to really understand the micro economies and the micro market in each market. But the key is the job growth and the population growth, which is just, accelerated. And that was forecasted prior to COVID. And it just, we got, 3 years worth of rent growth, or of population growth in about 12 to 18 months immediately afterwards.
Right.
So.
Right. And that's something that I think, has to slow down, because when things feel too good for too long, and start to see fundamental shifts in the economy, you have to wonder at what point does it catch up. And usually, from my understanding and looking at historical charts, data charts on economics, like you're seeing like a 6 to 9 month lag for multi, typically. Like, so you're gonna see markets that teeter up, or other areas of derivatives of fixed income that are going to start experiencing a little more pain, and then usually multi somewhere 6 to 9 months after that.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing we're also trying to figure out now, or like, where are we within that 6 to 9 month lag period? Are we in the beginning, the end? And we're trying to figure that out internally. But at the end of the day, the biggest fears we're having across Florida, which I touched upon briefly earlier, is insurance. Insurance taxes aren't really as much of a wild card variable, because as long as you set the numbers right, and you made your right assumptions coming out of the gate and took the more conservative approach, you're fine. As long as you got the right millage rate and you're going basically 85% against that.
Yeah, it's pretty predictable.
It's pretty predictable, right? So the two unpredictable pieces, and maybe I'm missing a few others, but I would say no question insurance being at the top of the list. Payroll is also there because of that labor disruption and that around. And I think a large part of it is that lower waged employees have been spoon fed the last 2-3 years. They got paid more to sit on their couch than they did to work.
Right.
So that also played a big role into, I think, a lot of what's going on now with, getting good talent, good employees. They're going to stick to the property, and it takes some time to adjust back to saying, hey, I actually have to go out and work. And what does that look like? And what does that mean for me? So that's a big adjustment that I didn't even I don't think anyone foresaw that, there's a lot of things that are tied.
Going back, like we said, going back 3 years.
Yeah. Back to the speeds.
As it relates to insurance, I heard I was with a client the other day, and I heard something very interesting. So I think everybody thinks that, or a lot of people who aren't, spending time on insurance policy in Florida, think that it's just a nature of the amount of claims that have been filed because of the hurricanes, right? Well, the reality of the situation is it's the insurance system in Florida, and which is overly litigious. And the number I was told the other day was that 9% of actually, not something like 9 to 11% of claims arise from the state of Florida, but 70-something% of insurance litigation comes out of Florida.
Wow. I didn't even know that statistic. That's pretty
So
impressive.
that's what makes it, that's really what makes it so expensive down here is.
Yeah, and also for the
is-
longest time, sorry to interject, but to your point, like for the longest time, like we didn't expect to, to have, like we were having really low rates of 3, 4, 5, 600. Like when we started even in 2018, like the rest of the country's rates were substantially higher on an insurance per
Right.
unit than Florida was. And yet Florida was more susceptible to to windstorm damage and all types of damage, right? So that was the type of thing I always kind of scratched my forehead on, but I wasn't really going to be so concerned about it because the rest of the market wasn't, and carriers didn't really care, and they continued to insure. But when it came to, I would say, the last 2 or 3 hurricanes in Florida, that's when they're like, we have $100 billion liability here. 100 something billion. I don't know the exact number. I think it was 120 was thrown around, $1 billion liability for what happened, to basically the Gulf Coast, in large part. So, seeing these events continue to occur, seeing how that climate change affects Florida, I think is also a lot of what the world's looking at. But at the end of the day, I think it's a problem for the entire Sunbelt and Southeast.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just Florida. At the end of the day, with insurance carriers are looking at the entire Sunbelt. And it happens to be that Florida was always suppressed at a lower level. But to your point, if they're constantly winning the litigations and constantly, are getting
It's just the system is allowed for basically attorneys to hijack the process, and
and
anytime attorneys get involved, it's going to get more expensive, right? Everybody's
right,
trying to get
and
their
they take
hand
away
in
from
there.
those proceeds, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
those attorneys that are there, to your point, like they're taking away those legal dollars now coming out of the insurance carrier and the landlord who's disputing the claim. So that was that's something that I think is a fundamental issue. And at the same time, now you're seeing a lot of rosy, like articles of, insurance companies coming back, and it's only a $50 billion problem, and, because they want to keep writing insurance. But, at the same time, there definitely is a major shift. I can tell you, I've been hearing whispers of guys down in the Key West that are seeing $4,000 to $4,500 a door insurance rates. And then, you have guys that are more inland like ourselves or more to the coast, but not on the water per se, that are, experiencing a 2X. So it's $500 a door on insurance, and, for your garden style product. And now you're call it, 2X on that. So, that's the new lay of the land. And I think also the biggest, I think, head scratcher in all this is that guys were buying extremely low cap rates, while at the same time they weren't forecasting any of these problems coming up.
Right.
So it's a pretty
so rents coming down or flattening, interest rates going up, insurance rates going up,
payrolls going up.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a pretty nasty storm for someone who didn't underwrite conservatively, or someone who took high octane leverage in a top of a market cycle, which was call it second half of 2020 or 2021 through till 9 months ago. So
then going through all that, then this is probably a good way to kind of start to get a summary of your thoughts going forward, is understanding all the things that we discussed. What is Topaz's sort of view, objectives, and sort of thesis on acquisitions and growing going forward?
It's a great question. So I'll start by tackling that question with what we're seeing, right? So what competencies are we seeing that we need to enhance? Hedging against the tighter deals, tighter cash generation on the deal. So starting cash flow amidst the rising rate environment that we just spoke about.
Right.
Let's understand where we are, right? Because we just highlighted all that. Preparing for more lender diligence, reporting for CapEx drawdowns. They're drilling us now more than ever. Lenders are breathing down your necks. Asset managers are breathing down your necks. even if you are doing very well, low leveraged, and have an executable game plan, they're starting to ask questions. They're starting to be more active in terms of, in terms of predatory follow-ups and asset management. Lower payroll, for asset management functions is difficult to do when you're in a time where you have to do more asset management, right? So that's something we're looking at as well. Slowdown in deal flow, I think, is a player in all this. I think, directly working with, your investment partners to really figure out what's the best use of leverage tied to the business plan, but also tied to the equity group is critical, and going more towards longer term plays, because, it's fine on an upswing, where you're like in 08, 09, and then you start buying in 10, 11, 12, and so on and so forth.
Right.
You could basically just ride that wave on 2-3 year deals and keep getting in, getting out, and clipping nice IRRs and nice equity multiples.
Yep.
But when you are in a time where it's a down precipitating market, it's a scary thing. What's scary is that, the guys are still buying deals with 2-3 year hold periods. You're essentially need everything to go right. Everything to go right, unless you're getting a steal of a deal, which is 1 million, but everything has to go right. So we're definitely taking a longer term outlook approach. That's historically how we've sold ourselves as an outfit. We're young, young company, young guys, looking to be more, more of a longer term outlook and be willing to be in the business for the long haul. And so I would say how that kind of segues into where we're looking at the market is increased opportunity with higher quality assets. So, across Florida. So, like I was saying earlier, because of all this turbulence, more institutional equities kind of went to the sidelines for the most part. So a lot of people are saying, hey, let's hold out and see where things are going. Or it's the wait and see kind of approach. So we're saying to ourselves, okay, let's see if we could see deals today that are, going to be, still allow for some deceleration in rents and discounted cash flows and still make sense of the deal. But ultimately, what we're looking at the next, following out of these outsized rental rate growths, or even exorbitant to some extent rent growth in recent years, we're definitely anticipating rent deceleration, ongoing market volatility in capital markets, a focus on investing in higher quality assets in suburbs and submarkets within those cities, because at the end of the day, it's becoming more of a function of staying power than it is wealth creation in today's environment. So we'll be able to survive, a lot of challenges, and the best way to do that with the least amount of variable, risk is on newer products. So that's why I was talking about newer product, or stable 90, 85 or 90s or newer product allows for you to hedge against that. We're, like I said earlier, we're facing that unprecedented triple threat, if you will, where you have high inflation, high interest rate, and skyrocketing property insurance costs. That's a lethal, triple threat combination to some guys. We were talking also about, expect to pay 2-3 times a unit what you paid historically for property insurance. So that's also getting baked into new underwriting. I think wellness components are also things we have to look at. This is an era of millennials who want more wellness, so technological connectivity, elevated amenities continue to hold popularity in 2023. So bringing more amenities to the properties, bringing more, more ways for people to socialize and collaborate and work. Gone is really the business center days. Instead, we're kind of growing demand for people prioritizing and maximizing co-working spaces, outdoor event spaces, indoor and outdoor event spaces, interactive experiences, things like that. So we're trying to bring some like intangibles to the communities, because that's where you can differentiate yourself from the other guy as well. So that a lot of that is still being held very valuable, even though that the wallets of many of our tenants are getting squeezed, which is ironic because you'd think those are the things that would go first and not be as much of a focus. Whether labor market conditions will continuously weaken into this year, we're not really sure. We think it's a very much an open question. We think it will fluctuate this year. We think it will continue to be high and we think we'll still continue to be a very expensive labor market. We do expect not only tech and financial services companies to continue furloughs, but we expect other industry sectors as well to join,
right,
or to follow rather. So that's something we're expecting. And then I would kind of just bring that all together, that we expect, resident retention to remain healthy, but it's going to be pressured by new supply. So, there's going to be a healthy, there's going to be this healthy resident retention, obviously weakening the labor markets to some extent. If you're operating your properties well and you're understanding your tenants well, because that's your customer ultimately. So, but the new supply is the fact that we're trying to understand, because if this new supply could come online at lower rates, which we don't know if they can or can't, but if they're going off their original pro forma and they're in at a market basis of, call it 2020 or post 2020 era, that's a very concerning thing, because we don't really see them being able to achieve those rents if we're already getting squeezed in our rents at a lower rate level. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity, I think, with, like I said, with new development, new supply coming online. And I think, it's no question that the credit underwriting bar has to continue to be on the upswing, because in recent years, creating a market of have and have nots, is very much, a predatory question, and the risk factors and volatility and uncertainty, these are things that give reflux to creditors. So right. The increasing elevations of these areas are bringing creditors to start, having more and more reflux to put out capital. So I think also making sure that, there's access to cost-effective, financing solutions, in enhancing those relationships to your lenders, is critical. Making sure there's direct line of communication to your lenders more than ever, I think, is critical and is paramount to survival in this era. And I think, pioneering more projects will see success, more significant expansions that, in their cost of financing. So, if you're, the bigger projects, the projects that, that aren't run-of-the-mill type scope projects in multi, that are like, now they're offering all these mixed use elements to multi projects. That's not a time to introduce those types of products in a time where the plain vanilla multifamily deals also giving them that same lender reflux. Right. So that's the type of thing we're seeing right now. A lot of that was being put into place, by the way, because of COVID. Everyone was coming out of the gates and saying, hey, well, we need mixed use work play and all this stuff. And I don't disagree. I think that is the future, but it's not a future when creditors are trying to wrap their heads around plain, historical, plain vanilla market deals.
Right.
So that's the type of thing I'm kind of scratching my head on is, what is that really going to look like? How's that going to play a role into things going to 2023 and 2024? But ultimately, to the point earlier, I think the major hurdles of this year are going to be, in a nutshell, not only the triple threat, but I would also include is increasing competition. So I would call it a quad threat, is that the increasing competition from new high quality apartments. Yeah. So that new supply with deceleration in rents, with all the, insurance, rising inflation, rising interest rates, rising utilities, labor costs, because more people are home now. So utilities have gone up, labor costs and payroll. So like all of that, what does that mean? And that's what we're trying to figure out. But we definitely think it means some pain.
I think we're in for a bit of a wild ride. Some more than others, frankly, over the next year and a half or so.
Oh yeah. Those guys were doing 80-80 on deals. I mean, God bless them. I mean, buying market value deals and doing 80-80 on the structure, on the debt financing, and doing floating rate debt, even with rate caps. That's a dangerous game that we never wanted to play. And fortunately we stuck to our guns. Again, it's enticing because it can enhance your back end promote as a syndicator and sponsor. You want,
discipline matters, right? Discipline matters. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'm sure we'll start to hear some, a lot of pontification and, hypotheses about what's going to happen when we're out in Vegas in a couple of weeks. I'm sure a lot of it will be over drinks because there's not going to be a ton of deal flow out there. So it's just going to be everybody giving us their opinion on what they think is going to happen and when the market's going to loosen up, right?
I think I'm just gonna be partying the whole time. And
yeah, that's what it sounds like.
With guys like, with close friends like yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, this is like the slowest deal season. People are trying to figure out their own housekeeping. Like we were talking about earlier, like what's going on in my portfolio, my house, and asset management efficiencies and stuff. So I think it's going to be a lot of, people just, maybe gloating about their deals that they did the year prior. Talking about the good, the golden era, if you will, of deal.
You're gonna have to listen really closely to people because they'll tip you off if they've got some deals in trouble. They're not gonna come right out and tell you, but if you listen real closely, you might get some, you might get an idea or an inkling on what deals might be coming around sooner than later.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think with each drink, it becomes a little more.
Absolutely. I'm not starting my mornings very early because I figured I'll do my best work at the bar. Well, cool, man.
Best market intel takes place at the
100%
Aria Las Vegas. We're doing the advertisement here live, guys. Aria Las Vegas bar is where you get all the secret intel to multifamily industry deals for 2020.
No doubt. Well, cool. Well, thanks for joining us today, man. This was fun.
Likewise. I really appreciate it. I didn't realize we went an hour.
It was fast. It went quick.
It flew by, but really thank you again for having us. And look forward to continue to listen to all these podcasts, because I got to say, when you're talking to people, it's great. But when you're hearing it coming from, leading brokers in the market and talking to leading sponsors, it's even more critical to keep a pulse on things, especially in a time like now where we have more time to focus on. You can step away from acquisitions and focus on market knowledge and intel. So appreciate you.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. We'll I'll make sure we get something on the books for NMHC too.
Likewise.
Grab a drink at the Aria Bar.
Let's make it happen.
Okay, cool.
Right, buddy.
Thanks,
so
Mark.
Much.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to Multifamily Method. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps our podcast get discovered by other savvy investors like yourself. Subscribe to Multifamily Method for free on your podcast platform of choice. Find out more about Capstone Companies at capstone-companies.com. Multifamily Method is executive produced by Capstone Companies. Audio production for the podcast provided by Andy Go of Gojo Studios, and video production by Yash Mystery of Mystery Projects.